The blanket of a dark purple sky gently holds the form of a pale yellow moon, which softly glows along the edges of ancient rotted shingles attached to the site of a massive, decrepit estate. Inside of that old, abandoned mansion stalks a few familiar faces. Scooby, Shaggy, and the gang have just split up in the middle of a mystery to hunt for clues. Or maybe more likely for these two, a bite to eat. I also find myself not paying much attention to the mystery at hand, or the terrifying monster who's more than likely just gonna end up as some sort of white-collar criminal scaring kids off the land to purchase dirt cheap. Instead, I find my eyes trained on one thing and one thing only: the backgrounds. Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Is a children's cartoon that came out in 1969, created by Joe Ruby and Ken Spears for Hanna-Barbera. You see, cartoons at the time, at least according to what I was able to find, were generally created with either an action-adventure theme in mind, like Johnny Quest, or created as silly slapstick, absurdist variety shows like you would see with Looney Tunes. And usually the creators didn't leave much room for anything in between. I mean, I'm sure there's some examples that you could point out, but it didn't seem like it was the norm. And it was action hero shows like Quest and Space Ghost that had been dominating the landscape. Because of the focus on action and fighting, apparently there were some parental watch groups that had been put off by all the intense violence and evil with a capital E villains, and so they demanded studios to make safer programs for them to show their children. In somewhat of a bind, Hanna-Barbera asked Joe Ruby and Ken Spears to come up with some kind of new show, and what they settled on was essentially a cardboard copy of the Archie show called The Mystery 5, which, and I'm not kidding here at all, featured a bongo playing dog called Too Much. Staff from Johnny Quest, and I would presume Space Ghost too, were brought over and were told to use Universal horror films as inspiration for the design of this new upcoming show. Once they had enough material for an initial pitch, they went to go show the network what they were working on and were apparently immediately rejected. Whatever they ended up showing them had been so grotesque and terrifying that they refused to put it on in front of children. After a little bit of tinkering and with some inspiration from the song Strangers in the Night by Frank Sinatra, the bongo-playing dog Too Much instead had his name changed to Scooby-Doo, which unfortunately led to the gang no longer being a band, which sadly meant that the bongos were laid to rest as well. I found a lot of the information for this video from an interview with Bob Singer, the layout artist of the original Scooby-Doo as well as other Hanna-Barbera shows. I didn't want to take any of the footage from the original video because I think it would be better to support the channel that I found it from. I'm going to go ahead and leave the link to the interview by YouTube channel JB and Millie if you're interested in learning more of the specifics behind the making of the show, as well as the general feel for what it would have been like to work at Hanna-Barbera at the time. Now, I'm not sure there's even information on this out there, or at least I didn't find it, but if I had to take a guess, I imagine the studio would have wanted to just keep the layouts and backgrounds that they already had because that would have just resulted in less overall work. I mean, they already solved the problem by changing the dog's name and putting him in the forefront. Why not just use the backgrounds you already have? And I'm so glad they did, because what resulted is, in my opinion, some of the most atmospheric, spooky-looking, and gothic depictions of everyday places you could possibly find. In a children's cartoon, anyway, about a mystery-solving dog. It doesn't matter where the episode took place. A mansion, a castle, theme park. Every episode was filled to the brim with these intense purples and blues, these beautifully painted gradients, giving off this haunted and almost apocalyptic energy. And yet it's still just a show for kids featuring wacky slapstick as one of the characters runs into a bath or eats a big sandwich. For example, I think of the episode A Clue for Scooby-Doo. It begins with the gang enjoying their time at a beach party. However, when you glance up towards the sky, you can see a different story as the blue fades out into a formless void. It almost looks like they're partying in the middle of the night, but there they are. Scooby's on a surfboard and Shaggy's roasting hot dogs. This is just another typical day for our groovy mystery solvers. There is a charm to the way the show looks, a macabre storybook world that sets it apart from every other Hanna-Barbera show and a lot of other cartoons as well. Take for instance the very first episode of the show, What a Night for a Night. In the opening shot, we can see a beautifully dark forest scene, the moon hanging low in the purple sky over the black trees barely lit up by the moonlight. We can see the impressions of fog slowly swirling around the sharp, gnarly bushes and trees, with the occasional pop of blue or green, but otherwise just sitting in this palpable darkness. The next scene features a museum during the daytime, and we get some colorful shots that are bursting with yellows and oranges. But when the gang comes back at night, we return to the familiar purples and blues that we established with.
Right, watch me snooze right in.
When we peer behind the characters during a close-up, we can see the individual brushstrokes that make up the gradients on the wall, which gives the scene this tangible feeling like you can reach out and touch it. The museum itself is highly detailed, filled with all manner of statues, frescoes, wall trimmings, and paintings, each adding to the spooky atmosphere as the gang pokes around in the darkness, stalked in the shadows by the Black Knight. Even by this first episode, they had already dialed in exactly how the show was gonna look. In a gaggle of galloping ghosts, we dig even deeper into the darkness as the gang heads towards a bright green, derelict and twisted castle. The low-hanging moon and the fog still present, though this time with a deep blue background, as painterly trees featuring these abstract brushstrokes jut up from the ground, twisting towards the sky. And as we get closer to the castle, we can see this really interesting little gargoyle guy. I just have to point out this design because this is just great. Look at this little dude. Once we do have a chance to enter the castle proper, and Velma's done being just an absolute boss.
You are not welcome in the castle. Go now, or abandon all hope of seeing the sun again.
You stop that. We have permission to visit this castle.
We're greeted with an intense, saturated, dark purple to blue gradient. Again, you can see the heavy brushstrokes applied left, right, up, and down, and how they even detailed these little bits of dark moss to add to the tone of this empty fortress. The twisted shapes of the corridors and walls give an expressionist style feeling. That harkens back to movies like Frankenstein and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. There's also this amazing bright pink and purple room that Fred and Velma end up in. The tables look almost too big for people. There's a fireplace and a balcony with a spooky window, and golly, I would love nothing more than to just sit in this room for a while. I don't even have anything to say about it really, I just like it. Shaggy and Scooby end up in this kitchen that is absolutely filled with broken pots and pans, spoons, cabinets, tables, and it certainly adds to the scene and makes the castle feel like it was at one point a central hub for a lot of people. Completely unnecessary for the plot as it whizzes by in just a few minutes, but it helps add to the overall mood. And that appears to be what the background artists cared about. Velma stumbles her way without glasses into the dungeon. And a funny little aside I noticed is that when the camera pans, you can see this lit bowl of coals. It's kind of funny to think about who came by and lit the coals in the dungeon. Or did the ghosts do it maybe? Who knows? Down here we return to more greens as we pan over the various torture equipment and eventually reach this wonderful skeleton, complete with spider webs draped all over its bones. Finally, I wanted to take a look at Foul Play in Funland. which amazingly enough actually opens up with this incredible orange sky taken over by some very dark purples. The gang notices that the amusement park behind them has lit up, and when they turn up to investigate, we are greeted with oh so many wonderful different props, lights, posters, banners, and booths. These are the kind of details that lead me to believe that the artists had a lot of fun and creative freedom when they worked on these. And that's why they ended up so interesting and detailed, and why there are so many eye-popping color choices and props and dressing added in. The amusement park is funny because in the narrative it appears to be like a stable place that people go to, but it's still drawn and given texture as if it were abandoned. You can see heavy dark strokes on the wood panels as the characters walk through, chips in the wood on the side of the buildings, posters peeling from the walls. All of this contributes to the mysterious and creepy feeling that each episode is supposed to have. So whether it's a stable amusement park or not, it's gonna be decrepit. There's also this old, dark wooden house that the park owners live in, and it just blends perfectly into the night sky, lit up only by the orange of the windows. The scene is framed by these willow trees that droop wonderfully down in this cool way, which draws your eye back down towards the house. And then just below, there's this big branch that also leads your eye directly to the center. The shot is just really cool. I'd put it on my wall or something if I could. I mean, maybe I can. I don't know, how hard is it to track down a copy of a cell? And inside the house, we get these really intense wood textures, super dark and heavy. I think because this scene had to be more lit than usual, you really get a good peek at the individual strokes that went into making these backgrounds. And that kind of says to me that the artists were able to use the darkness as a way to imply much more detail than they would actually have to include in the paintings, which is just a super smart technique. Anything you can do to make people see work that you didn't actually have to do is a win-win. There's these cool little paintings hanging up on the wall that helps to add some visual interest, but if you look at them individually, you can see that they're not actually pictures of anything, they're just kind of globs. But they still look neat and I like them. Returning back to the theme park during the Tunnel of Love and Wax Museum sequence, you really get another look at the purple, blue, red gradients on the rocks and the walls. I just can't get enough of this color. It's a huge inspiration to the colors I like to use when I make stuff. At the end of the episode, we get this tiny little window to show us that it's daytime, and we get a nice shot of the ocean as it meets the still quite dreary gray sky. But again, even in the daytime, the color palette keeps itself near the darker or muted end of things. If you'd like to check out more of what I mean and see some more of these backgrounds in all of their glory, there's this nifty little blog that has roughly 50 of them for you to look at. There's another Scooby-Doo show that has come out recently that has received a decent amount of criticism, not undeservedly so either. One that takes a more adult comedy style approach to the characters. One that felt as if the showrunners didn't like what they were working on or didn't want to make it. A strange little series named Velma. Now, just to start off, I do want to be clear. Originally, I loved the idea of a series featured entirely around the smartest member of the gang. Could this have been an interesting and fresh way to tell new stories with these same old characters? I'll admit I wasn't too excited by the idea of having Velma evade murderers, but I was cautiously optimistic. And this isn't to say that an adult-themed Velma-centric show where she dodges a serial killer is something that could never work. A good team and passionate creators can make any idea work. I never want to judge a book just on premise alone, but what we ended up with felt so cynical, almost self-hating.
You've had a long day? I was accused of a murder I didn't commit.
And whose fault is that?
Now again, I want to be perfectly clear that I have zero problems with the character designs or the characters themselves. I'm always happy to see characters in a new light, and there's nothing wrong with changing them to suit the story being told, or just to refresh things, or make things different, or tell a different story. I love that. One of my favorite things about this franchise is how malleable the characters and stories can be, and I truly think that's part of the reason that the show has stuck around for as long as it has. That being said, I don't want to just rag on the series for not appealing to me. It's not for me, and that's okay. Not everything has to be. Instead, I'd like to praise the series for 2 things that I noticed and would like to shout out. Firstly, the animation and the anxiety sequences were fluid and had cool color palettes that I really appreciated. It was nice they let the animators do their thing. And second, you probably already know where I'm going with this, but that's right, the backgrounds. They aren't quite as dark and dreary as the original. The first 2 episodes take place in a modern-looking town mixed with some city grungy gunk. However, there were several fun moments where I noticed that there were little Easter eggs. Old villains from the past put up in picture frames, recognizable names stuck up in the corners, props from some of the older shows hanging around. Whoever the background artists were for this show had a clear love for all things Scooby-Doo. It brought me back to the original series, where instead of paying attention to the foreground, my eyes were instead searching all around everywhere else. I found myself just wanting to see what fun little things I could find stashed around every corner. I imagine it's gotta be kinda tough to be a background artist sometimes. They'll spend all this time working on something, and if it's bad, it'll be pointed out. But if it's good, it's doing its job and barely anybody's gonna notice. The unsung heroes of the media that we love are people who barely get the credit that they deserve. The people that work in roles that you've never heard of, that are buried within hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, sometimes thousands of names in the credits. And all it takes is one bad director, one bad showrunner to bring it all crumbling down. Thank you to the background artists of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Without you, there wouldn't have even been a video to make. Thank you to the background artists of Velma. Thank you for bringing me some of the same joy. And even if nobody who worked on it sees this, I really wanted to say that at least one person noticed and was delighted in seeing your work. It's always fun to see people who are fans of the same thing you are, even if they're hidden away in the background. Scooby-Doo is one of my favorite franchises of all time. It was there during the hardest times of my life, and that means I have a completely unhealthy amount of love for it. I will be finding ways of coming up with more videos to talk about the series as we go on. Like the time the gang met celebrities in hour-long segments in some of the most nonsensical plots I think I've ever seen in a cartoon. Or when they decided to abandon the gang altogether and put Shaggy in a red shirt, who has now become lovingly known as Red Shirt Shaggy, a time when a lot of the monsters actually became real and Shaggy started turning into a werewolf or becoming a teacher or fighting literal demons. Or my favorite movie where they do battle against creepy swamp zombies and had, at the time, I think the biggest budget of any Scooby-Doo project ever? All this and more to come. Thanks for watching.